our State House studio in Montgomery. I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. All eyes were on Washington this week as Congress has struggled to pass a stopgap funding bill to avoid a government shutdown. The high drama on Capitol Hill started earlier in the week as a continuing resolution negotiated by House Speaker Mike Johnson was unveiled. The expansive plan included a lot of priorities for Democrats, given that their votes would be necessary to pass the bill. But that drew the ire of President-elect Donald Trump and Elon Musk, who successfully scuttled the bill. The House then took up a more scaled-down version of the funding bill and put it to a vote, only to have that vote fail. The scaled-down version would have funded the government at current spending levels until March, suspended the debt ceiling, which was one of Trump's demands, provided relief to hurricane victims in Tennessee, North Carolina, and Georgia, and provided aid to struggling farmers. That vote wasn't very close, 174 to 235. Every Democrat voted against it, along with 38 Republicans. None of the Republicans in Alabama's delegation were among that 38. But the House got one more try Friday night and successfully passed a continuing resolution that includes funding the government through March 14th, hurricane relief, and the farm package, with a one-year extension of federal farm programs and around $30 billion in economic relief for farmers. Alabama Agriculture Commissioner Rick Pate has been urging Alabama's congressional delegation to see to it that that farm package is passed. He says the state's row crop farmers are struggling, and many may go out of business soon.
Farmers as a whole sort of poor mouth a lot, but I see the numbers. I know what's going on, and these last 2 years have been bad. And I'm just afraid. I've talked to some pretty large farmers, a guy up in Lawrence County farming 7,000 acres, saying he's not planting next year, or the bank's not going to let him plant next year. And so, you know, it's not like these people leave this field of business and, you know, you don't have another 55-year-old with the amount of experience to come back in. And I thought we saw it as a nation during COVID, how important food security is to national security, and I'm just real concerned. These last 2 years have been, especially not everybody now, but you know, cattle prices are good, poultry's doing well, but our row crop farmers, the guys planting cotton, corn, soybeans, wheat, you know, those people are really taking it on the chin. These things only kick in when things are so terribly wrong, and so I really had hoped that this last couple of days they'd get something passed, because yeah, we need certainty, and of course the nation does anyway, as far as paying its bills, but certainly was hoping we could get some sort of relief to some of those farmers before it's too late.
Each of Alabama's 7 members of Congress voted in favor of that stopgap funding bill. It is expected to be taken up by the Senate tonight and passed in time to avoid a government shutdown. Congress also this week passed the National Defense Authorization Act, the annual bill that sets funding and policy framework for the Department of Defense. The bill included many provisions supporting Alabama's military installations and industries, including $300 million for Redstone Arsenal, Fort Novosel, and the Anniston Army Depot, $725 million for Alabama-based missile defense systems, and increased funding for Submarine Industrial Base as the Port of Mobile pursues a submarine shipyard. It also included a pay raise for service members, which was a priority of Alabama Congressman Mike Rogers, who helped craft the bill as chairman of the House Armed Services Committee.
No service member should have to live in squalid conditions. No military family should have to rely on food stamps to feed their children. And no one serving in the military should have to wait to see a doctor. But that's exactly what many of our service members are experiencing, especially junior enlisted personnel. This bill goes a long way to fixing that. It includes a 15% pay raise for the junior enlisted. It expands allowances for housing and food. The bill significantly increases funding to improve existing barracks and build new ones. It encourages the services to pursue public-private partnerships to provide better unaccompanied housing. The bill reduces dangerous health care wait times by waiving referral requirements for specialty care and expanding the number of DoD doctors and nurses with new special recruitment and pay incentives.
I actually spent last week in Washington, D.C., meeting with our congressional delegation. We have some exciting plans for expanding our coverage of the delegation, which we'll talk about later in the show. Back home to Alabama. This week, the state's electors gathered to officially cast their ballots in the presidential election. Capitol Journal's Randy Scott was on hand for the event and has that story.
Normally, Rick Pate has his hands full as the state agricultural commissioner. Today, he's wearing another hat as one of 9 state electors casting their ballots for the 2024 election.
Just the founding fathers setting up this whole system. Of course, I guess we were more of a republic style of government where they elected people and sent them up there and expected them to make the right decision.
The old House chamber in the Capitol is the base for today's event, and it's a full house on hand to see the ballots cast for the office of president and other posts.
They're looking for a shift in government. They want a smaller government, a more conservative government, a government that lives within its means, that cuts wasteful spending, and once again, that protects the individual.
Members of state leadership are also on hand for what they call a historic moment.
So it's a monumental day. It's a great day to be here, great day to watch our electors cast their vote for President Trump and Vice President Vance. And I believe there's great things coming for our future as we see some things change, more conservative ideas come back to our country, and focusing on the things that are really important.
Alabama Secretary of State Wes Allen says he's pleased of the work his office put into making this event happen.
I mean, you think about 1787 when they first set up the electoral process. I mean, how important that is. And so it's important for the people of Alabama to see how this process works.
Allen says it gives citizens a look into the system working for them.
Those probate judges, circuit clerks, sheriffs, boards of registrars, poll workers, so much work goes in prior to election day. And so it's really important, and then a lot of work goes in afterwards in preparing for an event just like today, the electoral process.
Elector Rick Pate agrees.
I think people be surprised we still do this and sign all these documents. I mean, I know the first time I did it, I was kind of awed about it. But yeah, I think the American system works. I mean, this whole thing they set up 250, 300 years ago still works, and it works pretty doggone well.
In Montgomery, Randy Scott, Capitol Journal.
The Alabama Veterans Mental Health Steering Committee met this week here in the State House, continuing its efforts on suicide and substance abuse prevention and mental health recovery. Members heard alarming testimony that showed opioid misuse among Alabama veterans is more than 10 times the national rate.
Per capita, we have a lot more vets than other states. And so really trying to address their health and behavioral health needs is really important. There are significantly higher rates of mental health and substance use disorder among veterans than the non-veterans in our state, and that there are really disparities in terms of geographic locations in our state and just an overall lack of enough services. There's $3 million in opioid settlement funds allocated to veterans pilot projects. And so the actual legislation says that that RFP has to be informed by the comprehensive plan. And so what we'll be doing is taking a look at those gaps and issuing an RFP that is designed to address those gaps. And for pilot programs who are interested in trying to figure out how to fill those gaps, you know, veterans don't know how to access some of the services that are available to them. They don't necessarily know that those services are even out there. And so I think there's a ton of work that we could do just to get the word out, to make sure that people know how to get to services and where those services are located.
The Reentry Alabama Commission met this week and heard from judges, educators, and other experts about how to work together to prevent the formerly incarcerated from reoffending.
The last 2 years, the Reentry Commission has been meeting with multiple stakeholders in the state government and the private sector to talk about what we can do to improve reentry efforts in Alabama. And that's part of our Reentry 2030 goal, which is to reduce recidivism in half by the end of this decade. And so part of the things we heard from today were various stakeholders who are currently doing programs and kind of asking why we can't combine programs or share data and share resources to make our programming even better. This is a venue for us to talk about how we can collaborate and improve reentry services. You heard the two gentlemen toward the end there. They talked about services they received when they went through reentry, post-incarceration. And the first thing they talked about was they talked about 3 or 4 agencies in that room they were getting services from that helped them succeed in life. So I think we've got to use that model and figure out how we can collaborate more together, work together, and provide better reentry services and reduce recidivism in Alabama. And that's what I heard from the stakeholders in there today.
We've reported about the change in leadership in the state Senate, as Republicans have selected State Senator Garland Gudger to be the new Senate President pro tem. He'll replace Greg Reed, who is going to the Ivey administration. We caught up with Democratic leader Bobby Singleton to get his perspective on the leadership change.
Well, first of all, I hate to lose Senator Reed. Senator Reed and I had a great working relationship. I think it was a relationship that was encompassing of what we should be doing here in the state, where we were able to work across the aisle together on those issues to where we can come together. Garland Gudger, I have no problem with Garland Gudger. I think that Gudger and I, we have a great relationship. We have a working relationship. I look forward to working with him. I think that he's going to be good for the state of Alabama. I don't think any one of my caucus have a problem with Garland, and we'll vote for Garland. And I'm going to encourage my caucus, and each individual have their own right to vote. However, I would encourage my caucus to do that, give him an opportunity. His caucus has given him the opportunity. But I do expect some of the same things in terms of the ability for us to sit down and talk like men and women and be able to get things solved. I do expect that from Garland. I don't expect anything different than what I was getting from Reed or I got from Dale Marsh. I expect that same thing from Garland. How we move through that is something different, but I do expect us to be able to have that opportunity.
The Alabama Law Enforcement Agency is launching its annual 12 Days of Safety campaign this Saturday, running through New Year's Day. The initiative aims to promote safe driving habits during one of the busiest times of the year. ALEA officials are focusing on key risky behaviors like speeding, impaired driving, distracted driving, and not wearing seat belts. Last year alone, there were nearly 500 traffic fatalities across Alabama. Throughout the campaign, ALEA will share safety tips on social media, host community events, and remind drivers to stay alert, especially around larger vehicles. Officials are urging everyone to prioritize safety, whether traveling to a holiday gathering or heading out and home after a night out. The state continues to make strides in bringing high-speed internet access to more communities, and leaders are confident that they're on track to meet federal deadlines for major broadband expansion projects. Capitol Journal's Jeff Sanders has more.
At a recent meeting of the Alabama Digital Expansion Authority and the Rural Broadband Oversight Committee, officials shared updates on the state's broadband initiatives. The Alabama Department of Economic and Community Affairs, or ADECA, is responsible for spending over $400 million from the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA, on broadband expansion. ADECA Commissioner Kenneth Boswell says the agency has already met its first deadline to allocate funds and is making steady progress towards completing projects by the end of 2026.
We're working at a feverish pace to stay up with everything that's going on. You can only imagine with those many dollars at how tedious that it can become at times.
One key initiative is a statewide middle mile project funded with $85 million from ARPA. This will lay nearly 3,000 miles of fiber to link internet providers to local networks. Another $245 million is being used to add over 4,200 more miles of middle mile infrastructure connecting schools, hospitals, and government buildings.
There's 14 grant applications for subawards that we're making preparations to get out to those awardees, and but you know, it's our goal to get them out after or before Christmas. I'm gonna be that broad because there's a lot of moving parts.
State Senator Bobby Singleton, whose district includes much of rural West Alabama, says broadband expansion is a game changer for those underserved areas.
As a state, we've done a great job at what we're doing. We are have mapped out, and we're playing. And I think we're playing just as better than any state of the 50 states in the union.
Singleton says rural areas face unique challenges like higher cost and slower timelines, but progress is visible.
I'm beginning to see fiber being laid in the district, and whether it's the middle mile or some of these programs coming from the other federal programs that are going to the last mile, I am beginning to see more in my district, and so I feel hopeful of what we are.
For Capital Journal, I'm Jeff Sanders reporting.
Coming up next, I'll sit down with Alabama Congressman-Elect Shomari Figures to talk about his plans for assuming office in less than 2 weeks. After that, State Senator Andrew Jones and State Representative Ed Oliver join me to discuss the state's efforts to improve mental health outcomes for veterans. Just in time for the holidays, State Senator April Weaver will be in studio to talk about her bill cracking down on porch pirates. And finally, I'll introduce the newest member of our team, APT Washington correspondent Alex Engel, who will be covering our congressional delegation from Capitol Hill. Exciting stuff. We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts. Keep up with what's happening with Capital Journal.
Welcome back to Capital Journal. In just 2 weeks, Alabama's newest member of Congress will take the oath of office. And joining me now is Congressman-Elect Shomari Figures.
Thank you, Todd.
Well, thanks for coming back to the show.
Back.
I think you were saying off air, it was like a year ago when
Yeah.
we first interviewed, as you were in that really large group of candidates running for the 2nd District nomination. And here we are. You're about to take the oath of office in 2 weeks. How's that feel?
Absolutely, man. It's a true blessing. Just fortunate to be here. Blessed to have the opportunity. We got in this race at the end of the day, not to win an election, but to be able to go and do the work on behalf of the people and places that mean the most to me. And we're blessed to have that opportunity to do just that, and looking forward to getting there.
Well, you're now in transition, right? I was just in Washington last week meeting with the delegation and introducing our new reporter. So you've got to go through setting up your office without actually having a physical office.
Yeah.
How are y'all going about that? I know you hire staff, you
Yeah.
make preparations. Tell me about that process.
Yeah, so look, I think the big part of it is trying to get your sort of office senior leadership in place, as well as intaking all of the help and resources that they offer you there in Washington. We hired our chief of staff already, so that's been very helpful because he's been able to come in and sort of help manage the process. But other than that, man, it seems like we're up there for orientation about every other week for a different part of it, but it's been good. We've selected our office already. We'll be in the Cannon building, 225 there in DC, and so
I was going to ask you. That's great. That's a nice hall.
Yeah, no, it's great, man. A very stately building and some very architecturally appealing features to it, and so we're excited to be there. But man, we would have been happy going in the basement, man. At the end of the day, man, you get to call yourself a member of Congress and be there to work on behalf of the people in Alabama. So we're just happy to have any place in the building.
I imagine you'll have a lot of visitors on January 3rd when y'all take the oath of office and are sworn in. Let me ask you about that. It was a wild week in Washington. I mean, the continuing resolution, the stopgap spending bill, it was existing, and then Trump and Elon Musk kind of killed it. I mean, you're not in office yet, and I guess thankfully for you, you didn't have to worry about voting on that or anything like that. But observing all that this week and really just the continued dysfunction, especially in the House, what is your perspective on how that can change in this new Congress coming up?
Yeah, I think it really amplifies the need for people to get back to the basics. And what I mean by that is getting back to representing the people who sent you there. Because at the end of the day, like people in Mobile and Montgomery and Evergreen and Phoenix City, they don't get the luxury of just shutting down the government, right? They don't get the luxury of just shutting down life if they can't agree to how to spend money. And so Congress we need to get our act together. We do, because people are really relying on on government to be there for them. And so we, being in this situation now, I think it's unfortunate. What's more unfortunate is that this seems to be a cyclical occurrence every 3 months, it seems, every 3 to 6 months. And so it's my hope that they can come to a measure that extends at least the sort of status quo, at least until March, I think is the sort of time frame that we're realistically looking at. And then we'll have the opportunity, once the new administration is in place, for them to have more of an influence on government spending. But right now, I think we need to focus on making sure that we're protecting the people that call America home and getting a spending bill done.
Yeah, it's on the spending that really is where the train runs off the tracks. And so I'm really interested in how that might change with, Republicans having, control over those, both houses and the presidency, but by a very slim margin. I want to ask you about that. So you will be in the minority, but just by a little bit. I mean, I don't even remember. It's like 2 or 3 seats, maybe even
3.
less, depending on if somebody's out of town or whatever. So what have y'all talked about in terms of the Democratic caucus of what your strategy will be? Because I'm sure that with a margin that close, it's different than it would be if there was 20, 30 seat margin. What will be y'all's strategy in trying to be successful legislatively?
Look, I think as a caucus, Leader Jeffries has made it clear that we have to find ways to work together to bring positive outcomes for the American people. More subjectively, for myself, the sort of dynamics of who's in control at the White House or in either branch of the legislature, that doesn't change the mission or the objective. We got there to go up there and work for issues to better life and life outcomes here in the state of Alabama, here in District 2, and that's what we're going to do. Certainly it changes the pathways through which we will have leverage to do that. But at the end of the day, we have to get there and get to work, because people here that need those hospitals back open in Union Springs, Alabama, they don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican. They don't care who's the president. They care about, am I going to be able to have a doctor to go see if I need emergency care? Are we going to be able to recruit businesses here without the impediment of having to disclose to them that we don't have a hospital in our county? And so, so it doesn't change what we're going up there to do, but we have to look to build bridges. We have to look to find those representatives, many of whom that I've had the opportunity to meet in my incoming class, who have some of the same issues that we have in our district, such as rural health care challenges, such as a failure to expand Medicaid, such as economic growth challenges. And we have to find what we can work together on, put our heads together, roll up our sleeves, and get it done.
Yeah, on these, especially on spending bills, we've got, a handful of Republicans, number changes year to year, who are really just going to be a no on just about any spending measure, right?
Yeah.
And so with a margin that close, in order to pass something, the Speaker, the Republican leadership pretty much have to go across the aisle and say, what can, how many votes can we get on the Democrats? Because they're going to have trouble passing bills only with Republican votes. So
and that's the way it should be.
Does that give you a little more leverage?
No, well, I think certainly it gives you some leverage. I mean, they have a 5-seat, well, I guess when we start with the Matt Gaetz seats being unfilled, they'll have a 4-seat majority, and possibly it goes down to maybe 218, depending on some other administration appointments of sitting members of Congress. But at the end of the day, they'll have the majority. And, I think, government should work in a way. We are not that different in terms of what the needs are in our communities, in terms of what we can leverage government to do. We're not that different as people, and so we should be in an environment where you need both Democrats and Republicans and independents to support a spending measure, right, that's going to impact lives in every single state and every single community in this nation. But I think what this process also shows us now is that we also have to have the courage, both on the Democratic side and on the Republican side, to tune out the extreme voices that are impediments to progress. Because at the end of the day, we got to get things done. Right? There are people out here that are relying on Social Security. There are people out here that are relying on Medicare. There are veterans out here that are relying on their benefits. There are federal employees that are relying on their benefits. There are communities out here that are relying on infrastructure spending. And so we have to get it done, man. And we can't let extreme voices on either side of the aisle stand in the way of that consistently.
committees, have there been decisions made on? I know they're starting to trickle out some of the decisions made. Have you been assigned to your committees yet?
We have not. We have not. We've had some recent leadership votes as it pertains to some committees, but
so that comes first, and then okay.
That comes first, and then leadership ultimately decides the placements. But look, we're going after. I think we had discussed this, several months back when I was here. We're going after transportation and infrastructure, agriculture, armed services, all committees that have a significant impact and significant presence in terms of what they support in this district. And so that's our hope. We are an incoming freshman though, and so at the end of the day, we're gonna go where they tell us that we have to go, but we're gonna look to do good for the district no matter where we land.
Can't be too picky as a freshman, right?
Exactly.
But armed services would be significant because Congressman Strong coming off of armed services to go to appropriations. It'd be nice to have another, kind of fill that seat there.
No, absolutely, and obviously Congresswoman Sewell is on armed services, and Mike Rogers is the chair, so the state is definitely covered. But we need to have that representation here in this district as well, and so. And
transportation and infrastructure, I can think of several infrastructure projects in Alabama where that would be significant.
Absolutely, and it's big. It's big from Mobile to Montgomery to even in our rural communities. We need infrastructure investments. We need infrastructure priority in terms of the voices in Congress that are arguing for what we need in our communities. And so I am looking to be that vessel, and hopefully we'll get there. But we're going to do what we can to make good wherever we get.
Well, good luck on that. We'll keep everybody updated as those decisions are made. I wanted to ask you, you've been a congressional staffer. I don't know how many years you served as congressional staffer, worked in DOJ, so you're no stranger to this. It kind of reminds me of Katie Britt when she was elected senator, and she had been a chief of staff, she had been worked on the Hill. So what's that like? Is there a vibe difference between you used to be a staffer, now your name's going to be on the door. Now it's you. What's that been like?
It's been a unique feeling in several respects, especially like when you run into former colleagues that no longer call you by your first name, and you're like, no, call me by my first name. But at the end of the day, I think being a staffer, I think it helps a lot. It's almost like being being someone that works in whatever field you're in, being that sort of worker on the ground before you ascend to management. You can understand, the challenges. You can understand what they're going through. You can understand the thought process. You can understand what they need. You can understand the gripes that they normally have about a member to try to avoid those sort of pitfalls. But so I think it helps. I think the biggest change is like the decisions, they fall to you now. At the end of the day, you go from being the person preparing someone to make the decisions to you being prepared to make the decisions. And so it kind of, that's strange, especially in such a short time frame, because I was just that guy a year and a half ago. But it is it's a unique feeling, but at the same time, man, it's one that we're blessed to be in the position to be able to make those decisions, and so we're looking forward to it.
Certainly would rather be in that situation than new to Congress completely and having to learn.
It has certainly helped a lot in terms of the staffing. An enormous amount. So many new members are spending, so much time staffing up and trying to find people that they can trust and that are experienced and balancing out all of the equities and interests that they have to consider. But having been up there helps a lot with that process.
Yep. Staff's so important to the success of a congressional office.
Absolutely.
Well, Mr. Congressman-Elect, congratulations again. 2 weeks, it'll be Congressman, and thank you for your time. We'll look forward to having you back.
Well, thank you, man. I'm happy to be here, and I will be remiss not to say, man, the delegation, the Alabama delegation in its entirety has been incredibly grateful. For the most part, in its entirety, has been incredibly helpful, and really looking forward to working with them.
Yeah. And actually, just to add this, when we were up there introducing Alex Engel, our new D.C. reporter, to the delegation, your name came up in every meeting with our delegation saying, "Have y'all met Shomari yet?" All that kind of stuff. So I think that's reciprocal. They're excited to have you as a member of the delegation.
Yeah, they've been great, man. Rob Adderhall pulled me aside on the front steps when we were taking the class photo. Jerry Carl has been great. I mean, it's Katie reached out, had lunch with Katie shortly after we got up there, and so it's been great.
Mm-hmm. Well, all right. Well, we'll look forward to watching your swearing in and seeing you progress as it goes.
Thank you, man.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page, You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. You're watching Alabama Public Television.
Welcome back to Capital Journal. This week in the State House was a meeting of the Alabama Veterans Mental Health Steering Committee. And joining me next to talk about it is our members of that committee, State Representative Ed Oliver and State Senator Andrew Jones. Gentlemen, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you,
Glad
Todd.
to be here.
I should have mentioned you're also each chairman in the Senate of the Veterans Affairs Committee, the Veterans and Military and Veterans Affairs Committee in the House. So, Mr. Chairman, thanks for coming on the show. I wanted to talk about this meeting today. There's a report that came out. Each of you have copies of that. But I wanted to start with maybe backing up and telling us how this steering committee that's working on mental health for veterans really got started. How did we get here?
Well, mental health has been a huge focus for the legislature for the last several years. But Representative Chip Brown and I, when we were looking at this issue, we quickly realized that veterans and military members and their immediate family make up about 25% of the state's population.
Wow.
Actually, we have the highest percentage of veterans per capita of any state in the United States. So we didn't feel like that, if you think of 1 out of 4 are military or immediate family of military members or veterans, we didn't feel like 1 out of 4, 25% of the resources were going for mental health toward those veterans communities. We felt like that needed to be addressed. We needed to look at a solution, and thus the Veterans Mental Health Steering Committee was born, and we're tasked with developing a comprehensive plan for the specific treatment needs of veterans as a state.
Mm-hmm. And there's a timeline involved here. I know that y'all met today. You heard some testimony from physicians. There was that incredible video that they showed. What were some of your takeaways from today's meeting?
Well, I've been doing this for a long time, and I am a veteran, so I look at it a little differently than some other people might. But I think the biggest takeaway is that we're going to be ready when the legislature goes into session to pass legislation based on the recommendations that come from this committee.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know that you've got the report that was passed out today. I know you haven't had time to read it yet, but walk me through what a timeline might be. What can we expect? I know there's another meeting in January. You said by session. That's only about 45 days away. So y'all are moving fast. Can we expect for a report to be public by then, or what's the timeline?
So I would commend Commissioner Boswell for kind of having an aggressive timeline of meetings. The legislation that Representative Brown and I passed does kind of specify a timeline of which we would get a report to the governor for her feedback, and then the plan would be adopted. And so that would be summertime at the latest. But obviously we have a lot of work to do between now and then. We're kind of pulling all the pieces together. And my takeaway from today is that we're finally starting to wrap our hands around all of this data and all of the various services and the demographics and all the things that are out there, which you have to do to develop that comprehensive plan. So that would be the next step after we complete it. We get a draft and we submit it to the governor for her adoption.
Mm-hmm. Well, that makes sense. You can't adequately address a problem like mental health, veteran suicide, things like that, if you don't have good data and a comprehensive plan. So I get the need for that. I'm curious though, I always have heard that when it comes to veterans' mental health, many veterans could be proud individuals, maybe not the type that would seek help on their own if they are facing a crisis. How do we address that reality?
Veterans, like anybody else, if you work in an environment, you become very used to it over a long period of time, and then suddenly you're taken away from that environment, and you're sort of left in a no man's land. You're not comfortable in the civilian world. You can't go back to where you were before. Mm-hmm. That leaves people in a very unique situation. And once you're in a uniformed service, you just can't quit it and go to doing something else and feel the same way.
Can't just flip a switch.
No, it just doesn't work that way. So I think it's very important that we find veterans where they are particularly National Guard and Reserve troops that come off deployments and all of a sudden they're back at home in one day. There are multiple components to figuring this out. Part of what we did here with this document is we figured out what assets we have for services, but we also had to figure out who are our target audience, who are these people, and how do we get these services to them. So that's part of the thing we're working on.
And you mentioned veteran to veteran care. That's an interesting concept. What does that mean?
Veterans respond better to veterans. That's who understands what's going on with a veteran. It makes sense to me, and I understand it, but how do you talk to someone if you haven't worn the same shoes and the same uniform? That's difficult. So it is important whenever it's possible to have veterans serving veterans.
I see. Yeah, because if I'm a veteran, maybe I'm more comfortable going to a provider, someone who served themselves. Is that kind of the idea?
Well, sure. The fear is if you're a veteran that nobody else will understand.
What's been the feedback from the veterans community? As there's been a lot of news going on about this, about y'all's work on the steering committee. What have you heard from back home around the state from that veterans community about how they're responding to what y'all are doing?
I think there's an excitement among the veteran population that we're finally starting to have some progress toward addressing these challenges. We've long known that veterans are more susceptible to mental health issues, to opioid and other substance abuse addiction, just based on their life experiences and what they've seen. So I think we have shown a spotlight, if you will, on the issue and on the lack of options and sometimes a lack of data it's been to kind of address these challenges. And so now that the spotlight's there, I feel like folks are coming together in the veterans communities to help participate and help us formulate the plan because they recognize that it's a challenge that we need to address.
A few months ago, we had this really unfortunate situation with the Department of Veterans Affairs where this dust-up between former Commissioner Kent Davis and mental health department, the governor's office, it eventually led to his dismissal as commissioner. I mean, pretty big deal. I think everybody agrees that was an unfortunate episode all around. But I keep hearing that there could be legislation to more or less overhaul the Department of Veterans Affairs, the State Department of Veterans Affairs, to make some necessary changes. If that came about, I'm assuming it would go through y'all's committee. So where are we on legislation, addressing the Department of Veterans Affairs, and how soon could we see a plan on that?
So I got an update from some of the governor's staff just yesterday that they're continuing to work through the process on developing the legislation, and it is my understanding that would go through both of our respective committees. I see this really as a way to elevate the Department of Veterans Affairs, bring them fully into the fold of state government, and highlight the work that's being done for veterans, and kind of make that person a member of the governor's team and the governor's cabinet. I think that's important. I think we need to make sure that veterans have a seat at the table. Everything that I've heard is that all these veterans groups, the VSOs, veteran service organizations, would still have a seat at the table. So I think to me it's a positive development because we're elevating the status of the organization.
Well, I could see that because it has been, ever since I guess it was created, almost kind of quasi, in the fold, and it's an executive branch thing, but it's not in the cabinet, and so not the accountability structure there is weird. So do you think making it more in line as a cabinet agency would go towards, I don't know, more
Well, sure, and if we're responsible for spending taxpayer dollars, so it's absolutely imperative that we have some sort of accountability. So elevating it to the executive branch does exactly that. So I think that's important. The organization is just different than it was when it was first organized. Now there's 5 veterans homes, a multi-million-dollar budget, VSOs in almost every county, veteran services officers and offices. So it's a lot bigger than it was when it was first organized.
Absolutely. And probably needs to work very closely with mental health and in terms of, like you said, identifying those who are in need of care.
And
things
not
like
just
that.
mental health. Several state agencies need to be directly involved in what we have going on with veterans to attack the problems that the veterans are having.
Mm-hmm. So their ability to communicate as cabinet agencies is probably
Absolutely.
important. Okay,
Definitely.
Okay. Well, look, we want to follow what you're doing on the steering committee. It's very important work. So I'll ask you to come on in January and maybe give an update. Also be in touch with Commissioner Boswell, who's got an aggressive timeline, and I think it's interesting that y'all are moving fast. But thanks again for coming on the show, and we'll see you in January.
Thanks,
Todd.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts. Keep up with what's happening with Capital Journal.
Welcome back to Capital Journal. Joining me next is State Senator April Weaver. Senator, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Todd. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I wanted to have you on because you have legislation that is very timely here in the holiday season. It has to do with porch pirates, those who go and steal people's packages off of their porch. Just a crazy thing. What does your legislation do?
So this legislation is the same legislation that I brought last year, and we did a lot of work on it, and I'm bringing it back this year because I have a lot of constituents who have been affected by this year, especially this time of year. It's really bad. Mm-hmm. It doesn't change the theft statute, but what it does is it adds a component that does include packages that are mailed or shipped to you.
Okay, so what does it look like now, and what would your legislation change it to?
And again, it would just add the component of something being mailed or shipped to your home.
Okay.
If we implement this legislation, we will be the 12th state in the nation to have legislation specifically addressing porch piracy. And again, this time of the year, it's really, really bad. I've had some calls in my district related to porch pirates and stealing of Christmas gifts. And
it's awful.
This time of year is especially bad, and I don't know how young your viewership is, but I'll be very careful in how I say this. The people that have called me are parents who have saved their money, bought their children's wish list, and here we are right at Christmas. Maybe the package has been delivered, but someone has stolen it off their porch or from their property, and so here they are right at Christmas with no gifts for their children, which makes it even more terrible this time of year.
It is awful, and especially for parents that are on a budget, and that's maybe their only chance to give their kids a great Christmas. So I'm guessing it would put some teeth into that, and really add some stricter penalties for those who are caught.
Right, and again, we're not changing the penalties. The statute and the variances of the penalties remain the same. It's based on the value of what they steal. Now, the thing about being a porch pirate is, you don't know what's in the box when you steal it, or I would assume that most people don't. They're just going to get the box because they know that people are buying gifts, especially this time of year.
Okay. Well, session's coming up. We're just a little over a month away, February 4th, so I'll look forward to that bill. And it's very timely this time of year. Speaking of the session, we're coming right up on it, and y'all are going to have a new president pro tem in the Senate. Your colleague, State Senator Garland Gudger. He's got to be voted in, properly on the floor there, but he's going to be the pro tem.
Sure.
I know you know him well. What was that process like, knowing that Greg Reed was stepping down? There was an election there in the caucus. Walk me through behind the scenes what happened.
Well, certainly our caucus has a process in place. It's the same process that we used when Senator Schofield left and we elected Senator Livingston as the majority leader, and we used that same process in caucus to elect the new pro tem. It's a fair process. It's one that has worked well for our caucus, and that's the process that we used again this year. I do know Senator Gudger very, very well. Upstairs we have pods with our offices, and so my office pod has a pod of 4, and so I have shared an office space with him since I returned to the legislature in 2021. So by virtue of that, I've spent a lot of time with him. I've actually been his co-pilot as the vice chair of Fred, and he's the chairman of Fred. So have had the opportunity to work very closely with him during the time that I've been in the Senate, and I'm looking forward to where we go next session. As you look at it, I think it will be a different feel in the Senate. I don't think, just like Greg Reed did not lead like Del Marsh, I don't think Garland Gudger will lead like Greg Reed or Del Marsh. He will lead like Garland Gudger. And you know, it's going to be interesting to see the new dynamic, because you know, he has very strong relationships, probably one of the friendliest people here in the State House, and I think it's going to be interesting to watch.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to having him on the show in early January. Last time you were here, you and your colleagues had just returned from the southern border, and you said you might be developing legislation dealing with the immigration situation. How's that going? Might we see anything develop?
You know, certainly we have been working on that legislation related to immigration since our border trip. The new dynamic in that is we have had an election since that time, and you know, not only is it going to change our immigration legislation, I think it changes a lot of what you see throughout the coming session. Specifically for our immigration legislation, you know, we were playing defense to a lot of the Biden policies when we first started talking about this. Now, since the election, we'll be looking to see what changes President Trump will make. And I think it's more of a strategic process in now, what can we do once we see what direction they're going, what can we do to help strengthen those federal processes that President Trump will be putting in place related to immigration.
Yeah, certainly we can expect a different approach to immigration in the next administration. Any other bills you're working on that we can anticipate? We've got about a minute.
You know, I do work with law enforcement a lot, have been working with the DAs a lot. I have a drug bill that will work on dealing with fentanyl specifically, and how we deal with some of the things that the law just needs to be tightened up a little bit on. Some more gas station drugs, as you call it, that children are getting involved in. I'm working with law enforcement on how we address some of that stuff. I usually always have some health care bills.
That's
I
right.
do have one again this year, looking at rural hospital tax credits and what we can do to help our rural hospitals become more viable and provide that great service that they provide to our rural communities. It's modeled after a program that has been extremely successful in Georgia, and I'm looking forward to bringing it and seeing what we can do to get that done this year.
Well, we will look forward to all of those in the upcoming session. Senator, thanks again for coming on the show. And
thanks for having me.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you too.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page.
Since 1997, Alabama Public Television has provided programs, services, and resources to child care professionals, teachers, and parents. Visit aptv.org/education to learn more.
Welcome back to Capitol Journal. Some exciting news here at Alabama Public Television. Starting in January, Alex Engel will come on board as our Washington correspondent based on Capitol Hill, covering Alabama's congressional delegation. And joining me now is Alex Engel, Alabama Public Television's Washington correspondent. Alex, welcome.
Thank you, Todd. I am just so excited for this new opportunity and to be here in Alabama to tell people about it.
Absolutely, yeah. So you're in town for some meetings with the team here. We're going to go to Birmingham, have some meetings with the team there. So we're really excited. But I was hoping you could share with our audience just a little bit about your background, education professionally, and what led you to this job?
For sure. I'm from Sugar Land, Texas, outside of Houston, and then went to Missouri for their journalism school and focused on local TV news and telling the stories of communities. I thought it was really important, and I think TV news is such an important thing in our societies as it does breaking news and it just really gets to the heart of what's going on. And so I got to cover tornadoes to local government to snowstorms to everything in between. So lots of great experience reporting, producing, anchoring in Arkansas. After I went to Missouri, I did a few years in Northwest Arkansas covering all the news that happens in that area, which was quite a bit, as I said, and really enjoyed that. Love local news. I think it's really important to talk to certain communities and the people and what they care about, but also really am interested in covering politics and always wanted to be in DC. So came to DC and started graduate school at American doing journalism. Got to be on the Hill, got to cover hearings, and really just fell in love with covering politics and breaking down the important parts. And through the election season, got to cover some of the campaigns, the presidential campaigns and transcripts, and just data and kind of diving into that. And that was for the election season. So I was looking for my new gig and found this one covering local news, but on a DC angle. I think is really unique and something that I think is really important for Alabama, and I'm excited to do that.
Absolutely. We've been excited about this for a long time, and we were lucky to find you. It's a perfect fit with your background in television news. So it's been a goal of ours for a long time to have someone based in Washington covering our delegation, because right now on Capitol Journal, we do a lot of Zoom interviews with our members of Congress, right? Or if they happen to be in town, we can have them on set. But that's not ideal. You being based there on Capitol Hill with the cameras going through the halls, I think is really going to be great for our ability to share with the public what their elected representatives are up to, how they're voting, how they care about the issues. And so you and I spent some time up in D.C. last week, trudging around Capitol Hill, meeting with the various members of Congress, also their staff members. I'm curious what your impressions were after meeting some of our senators and representatives.
Absolutely. Well, we sure got our steps in going to all of the offices, all 9 of the offices of Alabama. But it was really sweet because everyone was just so eager to meet with us. And obviously their time is super busy and valuable at this time of year. But they were really willing to listen to our mission and just being the eyes and ears of Alabama there in the Capitol and in D.C. I think will be really beneficial. And I think they saw that this was a partnership that they could give their messages out to their constituents here in Alabama. But I could also ask them questions on why they voted a certain way or why they're supporting this cause but not another cause. And those are questions that national reporters aren't always going to be asking lawmakers. And so I want to be asking the questions that really matter to Alabama up on the Hill and really making sure that the people of Alabama know what their lawmakers are deciding on and what they're doing. And so we got really great responses from all of the offices. And so I'm really eager to continue to build those relationships up on the Hill. And all the lawmakers have different personalities and different interests. And so it'll be really fun to dive into those and get to know them better and just to really make sure that Alabama knows what the representatives and senators are doing there.
Yeah, those were great meetings. And most of the delegation, I've known these folks for a while, but it was great that they spent some time with you building that relationship because you're going to be, like I said, spending a lot of time covering them. I'm curious, based on those meetings, what issues do you think we should expect you to cover as it relates to Alabama?
Well, I think defense spending is obviously going to be a big one. Space Command, all the Alabama members want Space Command to come back to, really officially be in Alabama.
That came up a lot.
That came up a lot. And so I know Alabama senators and representatives are very eager to make that happen. And they're feeling relatively confident with Trump coming into office. So that came up a lot. I think agriculture is obviously going to be a super important one. Right now they're working on the Farm Bill and the farm different stipulations and the end of year funding bills. And so it'll be interesting what they decide on it here and then how that might affect funding decisions later on. And so I think that is important. And then appropriations and just how they're spending money in the government. I know we have some members on appropriations committees, and so it'll be interesting to see how they decide to fund what kind of things in this new year and how they kind of align with Trump's priorities.
Yeah. On the appropriations front, it was interesting because we met with Congressman Dale Strong, and they brought it up, like the fact that he was pursuing appropriations And that decision happened like the next day when we were up there. So that was really interesting, him going on appropriations. 2 appropriators in the House, 1 in the Senate. That is a pretty big deal. And you know, so much of what happens in this building, in the State House, is dependent on Washington, right? Their spending decisions really impact a lot of the budget decisions that happen here, a lot of the policy decisions that happen here. And with so much of our audience being plugged into the legislature, it's really great that we're going to have that reporting to make everybody aware on the front end of what's happening. Well, look, Alex, I won't keep you any longer, but we're really excited to have you here at APT as our new Washington correspondent based in D.C. Good luck.
Thank you. Very excited, and I am just excited to get to know Alabama more. And so if people are coming up to DC for business or lobbying interests or even school groups sometimes, I would love to connect with them. I think we're always looking for stories in the nation's capital that connect to Alabama, and so would love to make that happen. My email is on the screen now, and so please reach out if you have any connections related to DC and Alabama stories and want to make sure that that coverage happens. And again, just be the eyes and ears of Alabama there in DC. So I'm excited to get started in January.
Alabama's angle in D.C. Great. Alex, thanks again.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
Montgomery native Percy L. Julian was an internationally acclaimed chemist. The third African American to receive a PhD in chemistry, he specialized in the chemistry of natural products and their synthesis in the laboratory. This technology is very important in medicines, food products, paints, and firefighting foams, among other things. Julian received many awards, including election to the National Academy of Sciences and the National Inventors Hall of Fame.
That's our show for this week. Thanks for watching. And this is our last Capitol Journal program for 2024. On behalf of all of us at Capitol Journal, thank you for joining us for what was quite an eventful year in state government and politics. We are grateful for your trust and will endeavor to continue earning it every day. For our Capitol Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and we'll see you next time.